we'll introduce ourselves briefly, and then we'll get right into the substance of the day. Again, a little bit of background about me. I'm living in Northern California, also known as Ohlone territory in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I've been practicing for a lot of years, actually over 45 years of practice. I've been teaching for most of that time. I'm connected with Spirit Rock Center, where I'm one of the teachers. Also teach regularly for Inside LA, and I'm one of the teachers at the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, California, and also teach in different parts of the US and sometimes internationally. And my interests are pretty broad. I'm very interested in traditional teachings. I have met many of the great Asian teachers of the 20th and 21st century, both from Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand and Burma. I've also practiced a lot with Tibetan tradition. But then I'm also have a strong interest in making this real in contemporary culture. So I teach a lot on the intersection of Western psychology and meditation, particularly on the theme of transforming the judgmental mind, and then have for over 30 years been involved with connecting inner practices with social change and social justice work, and have done a fair amount of writing, including books on that topic. Okay, and my co-teacher is Tere Abdullah. Please, Tere.
Yeah. Thank you, Donald. My name is Tere Abdallah. I'm Mexican originally. I've been here in the US for the past 22 years. So right now I'm sitting on unceded land of the Tongbas, named Santa Monica today. And I usually spend a lot of time in unceded land of the Nahuatls, or Mexico City, where from I just got here back last night. I have been a member of Inside LA for many years, and I'm a graduate teacher of the Spirit Rock Teacher Training Program. And although my curriculum is not as wide as Donald, on the one thing we both coincide is that my first teachings around Buddhism were based on the Tibetan tradition. So that's where we kind of connect through. So that's why we want to offer together the retreat in May and today's half-day retreat. And I'm going to leave it there. I'm very passionate about sharing what I've proven myself to be of immense benefit for me and for many others. And I'm grateful for, BBRC and Inside LA and all of you just, watching your happy faces on the screen and knowing that you're ready for a very short half-day adventure, but just going deeper inside, and that at the same time that will impact the wider world in which we all live. So I appreciate that very much, and I feel kind of joy when I see people that want to do this for your own personal benefit and for the benefit of all beings. So thank you, and I appreciate very much your participation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tere. And let me say a little bit about the today's retreat. This is both a kind of a preview of our 7-day residential retreat in May 1st to 8th, but it also is offering an overview, and we'll have a retreat with talks and guided practices on the main areas from the May retreat. And, we're very happy to offer both today and in May this really an exploration of what I sometimes call the treasures of the Buddhist tradition. That in, particularly focusing today on three areas, which are there in the title, which are really the most valuable dimensions and not very commonly taught together and not very commonly taught in a lot of depth. And these three areas are the development of concentration, or samadhi in the original language, the cultivation of liberating insight, which for the Buddha is what leads to freedom, leads to nibbana or nirvana. And then thirdly, the opening to what we're calling awakened awareness, a non-dual awareness, which is beyond our ordinary mind, our ordinary consciousness, and which the Buddha called it the signless, all luminous, expansive awareness, and which teachers in the Thai forest tradition call the radiant mind. You ready for that for today? Okay, here we go. And so we'll be really offering an overview on these fundamental practices. In the May retreat, we will complement those three areas, and those three areas are really found in the title of the retreat. Settling means developing concentration, seeing relates to liberating insight, and spacious awareness relates to what I called awakened awareness. We'll be complementing that at the retreat with regular practice of loving kindness or metta, and also qigong. We won't be doing those today, mostly for matters of time, but at the retreat, we'll be bringing in, we could say, 5 fundamental practices, all you would ever wish to do at home, right? All, very, very crucial foundational practices. So the structure of our day today is pretty simple. We're going to be having a relatively short talk about another, what is it, a little less than half an hour. And this will be on particularly on teaching on samadhi or concentration, as you can see on the screen share. And then, and also an introduction to the 3 ways of seeing that liberate, which is insight into impermanence, into dukkha or reactivity, and into the teaching on not self. I will mostly give this talk with Tare adding some, and then Tare will guide us in practice in this area. That will take us up to around 11:25. We'll have a period for walking meditation, using the bathroom, doing what you need to do for about 20 minutes. And then we'll come back for a second session, which will have the same structure. I should say that after the guided practice, there's time for discussion. So we'll have for both sessions, there'll be relatively short talk, guided practice, both of those about half an hour, and then discussion about 10 or 15 minutes. We'll have the same structure in the second session, and this will move on to more about liberating insight related to dukkha and not self, and then also awakened awareness, followed by guided practice, and then discussion. And so we'll finish at 1 p.m. Pacific. Okay, so thanks, Jay. We can let go of that. Yeah. So anything of a logistical nature, any questions people have, if you need for any reason to use the bathroom before our 20 minutes of walking or break, of course, feel free to do that. Any logistical matters, any questions before we get right into things? Okay, great. So I'll talk some about the nature of samadhi and cultivating it, and then some also about liberating insight. And I'll give also then some short time for Tere to add to it. Then Tere will guide us in practice. Okay. So these two areas, cultivating samadhi or concentration and developing insight, were often the way the Buddha framed the two main areas of practice. Developing samadhi is the main heritage that the Buddha received historically from the earlier traditions that coming out of India. His innovation was to develop mindfulness and liberating insights. So what is concentration or samadhi? I like to use the word samadhi more than the word concentration, because in English, sometimes the connotation of concentration is trying really hard, right? Really concentrating. And yet, if you look at the etymology of the word samadhi, it doesn't have that sense of putting a lot of effort out. It's actually the etymology, the word SAM in samadhi, or the part SAM, is related to English words meaning summary, or bringing together. And so the actual etymology of the word samadhi is placing together. Doesn't have connotations of a lot of effort. It means bringing together. One translation or alternative translation for samadhi is unifying the mind, or unifying the mind and heart and body. One writer on samadhi, Richard Shankman, who wrote a book with that title, he said that samadhi is unifying the mind in steady, undistracted awareness. And it's a very natural and central quality. The Buddha said, this is from the Buddha, there comes a time when one's mind becomes inwardly steadied, composed, unified, and concentrated. That is then calm and refined. It has attained to full tranquility and achieved the unification of the mind and the heart. It is no longer maintained by strenuous suppression of the defilements. So very fundamental quality, beautiful quality, really having the mind be more steady and more still is really crucial for insight. The Buddha once said, can we have freedom and liberation without samadhi? That is not possible. And so it's a really crucial quality that if we've been practicing mindfulness and insight meditation, we've been developing it some. How many people here have been practicing mindfulness for some time? And how many are relatively new for mindfulness? Yeah. So mixed. So we've all been developing some degree of samadhi. One of the wonderful things that researchers in neuroscience have found about samadhi is that it actually can be learned. It can be the brain, as it practices more samadhi, can actually develop a greater base level of samadhi. And I've seen that in my own experience. I've gone through periods where I did a lot of cultivation of samadhi, and I have seen my baseline of stability and steadiness and lack of distractedness increase over the last years. And so what that means is we keep on practicing where your baseline level is today. If you do a lot of practice, it'll be different in 2 years or 5 years. And you'll be able more and more to have the mind be able to be still just with intention. That's where this is all going. The mind can actually be still just by bringing your attention to, to the object. So samadhi is cultivated in a variety of ways. Usually, as probably most of us know, it's by focusing on what we sometimes call an anchor, on one area of experience. We sometimes call that an object of experience. And how many people have focused on cultivating samadhi through focusing on the breath? So many of us, probably most of us, have done that. How many people currently work with the breath as your main focus? How many have some other area where you focus? Yeah. And there can be other areas. In one text from the 5th century called the Visuddhimagga, or the Path of Purification, there were 40 objects of concentration that were listed. The breath is just one of them. Yeah. The Buddha taught the breath a lot, but in this list of 40, one could develop concentration through cultivating metta or compassion, any of the heart qualities. You can do it by, I sometimes give as an alternative, just focusing on the hands touching together. For some people, the breath doesn't work well because the breath is not emotionally neutral. If anyone has a history of asthma, for example, the breath isn't going to be a good one to go to. I've met people who were told to focus on the breath, were not given alternatives, and the meditation didn't work. And they actually pulled back from any meditation for a few years, and then came to an event that I was offering where I gave alternatives and say, oh, thank you. Very nice. We have alternatives. And so another one that people sometimes use is sound. But we could work with many things. I have a friend who repeats a mantra over and over. That would be a way of developing concentration. It could be being aware of the whole body. All of these are legitimate ways to develop concentration. And maybe just a few further words on developing samadhi, and then I'll say some about the practice of developing liberating insight. For many of us, we have an association, as I mentioned, of concentration with putting out a lot of effort, really focusing, sort of going down into things. And the essence of our practice of developing samadhi or concentration is to bring together both effort and ease, which goes against a lot of our past experience with concentrating, where we might have the effort, but not always the ease. And so for many of us, developing more concentration will really need to focus on relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, having more ease, but somehow bringing that together with focusing, with bringing the mind back continually. And when we teach retreats, for example, on developing samadhi, we often emphasize that. We try to bring in qualities with the practice of samadhi, which get us out of the over-efforting mold. We even sometimes talk about developing being with the breath almost as like devotion. Oh, precious breath, let me be with you continually. You are my lifeline. You are my precious love, the breath, right? And that can be a way of holding the breath with almost like a devotional quality, but still coming back. So we'll be looking when we practice to ask we want to each ask ourselves on that balance between ease and effort, too little focus, too much focus, where have I come down in the past? We want to look there. And almost like have an intention at the beginning, if I've really tended towards over effort, let me balance that out as I practice to develop more samadhi. And then as we develop samadhi, our second broad area of practice is cultivating what we can call liberating insight. And this is insight into impermanence, into what's called dukkha. I'll talk more about that in the second part. Into dukkha, I like to translate dukkha as reactivity. You know, the pushing away the unpleasant, the grabbing hold of the pleasant. And we practice and see that more clearly. And then the third area is seeing clearly into not self. Sometimes these three are called the three characteristics. And I like to use the language of calling them the three liberating insights, or the three ways of seeing that bring freedom. Because the Buddha said that these three areas are really what we want to have insight into. We talk about insight meditation. What kind of insights are we talking about? Well, the Buddha had an answer for that. You know, he said it's basically insight into how things are changing, how we often get caught in reactivity, secondly, and then thirdly, into a rather mysterious teaching called not self, which again, we'll go into more in the second session, but it's really seeing into the nature of self, the nature of our constructions of who we think we are. And so it's probably of the three, the most potentially confusing area. So let me say a little bit more about impermanence and how we practice. Then I'll turn it over to Tere, both for some further comments and then leading us in practice. And so from the Buddha, he talked about how when we develop concentration, then insight is possible. This is from the Buddha. Practitioners develop concentration. A practitioner who is concentrated understands things as they really are. In other words, there is insight. It's said that the Buddha's last words were urging people to look carefully into the nature of impermanence. These are reportedly the Buddha's last words to practitioners. I exhort you, all fabrications in your experience are subject to change. Bring about completion by being heedful of change. Also from the Buddha, when by knowing impermanence, noting arising, noting change, noting passing away, one sees things as they actually are with proper wisdom, seeing everything increasingly as impermanent, connected with dukkha, and subject to change. When that happens, joy arises. And impermanence is interesting because in many ways, it's obvious, right? We don't have to think a lot to know that everything changes. How many people would agree that everything changes? Not all of us. Oh, a few late hands. Okay. And so we know that intellectually, but what the teaching is about is that we actually don't know this at the deeper levels of our experience. And that's what the practice is really about. And also, we tend not to really recognize it in some important ways. Namely, everything changes, everything is impermanent, everything arises and passes away. How about me? Do I change and pass away? I don't think so. I'm here forever, right? Again, intellectually we know that's not true, but maybe deeper in our being, we don't fully get impermanence. And so in the Tibetan tradition, when one is first starting out practice, one of the early reflections is every day for maybe 5 minutes, think about how everything changes and think about my own impermanence. And I find it helpful to do that just in a very ordinary way. Think about how the seasons change. You know, here in the Bay Area, we had rain. Now it's a sunny day, it's going to be up to 70, right? And things change. And politicians rise and fall, right? All sorts of things continue to change, right? So we can look at impermanence in that way. In a meditative context, we really look at impermanence in two main ways. First of all, we look at gross impermanence. We just notice in our experience things continually changing. And we might, you know, Terry will lead us in a meditation. We might focus, for example, on the sensations as my hands are touching and just notice continual change in my hands, not necessarily deeply spiritually profound, but something that we study. And I've done retreats where I just noticed ordinary impermanence for a week at a time, 15 hours a day, right? And something builds when you keep studying impermanence like that and really noticing it. We can study it with sound. We can listen to a sound arise, stay for a while, and pass away. You know, I can ring my bell. And you can hear it, notice it changing, then the sound is gone. So we practice partly with very, very ordinary impermanence. And then as we go more deeply, we start noticing impermanence at a deeper level. We notice, and when the mind particularly gets quiet, we can notice how things are changing continually, almost like in microseconds. We have to get rather concentrated. We can see increasingly how our entire experience is made up of these very, very brief moments that we almost unconsciously bring together and construct experience that seems solid to us. And part of the deepening of practice is to be able to see how that's not entirely true, how it's true on one level, but when we actually look more deeply, we can see impermanence, we might say, at a more radical level. And that's potentially what can happen when the practice gets deeper, particularly on a retreat. So with that being said, let me turn it over to Terry for some further comments and then leading us in practice.
Thank you, Donald. I think you gave us already a very deep and wide, profound teachings on Buddhism, and I'm sure everyone had already experienced, even if you did not have the concept, you have already experienced everything that Donald have mentioned, I'm sure. But sometimes it's important and interesting to have the rationale or the logic of what we do, right? So I can see that everyone on the screen here had some practice already of sitting, of meditating, of practicing, have already maybe heard about impermanence, and of course have experienced it, right? And in satisfactory way of that we live all our days. But it's I find very interesting to focus a little bit more on certain aspects of the teachings, which this time and for this day and for the May retreat is going to be mostly practicing shamatha and trying to achieve samadhi. So shamatha, I can't recall if Donald, did you mention the word as well? But
I think not, yeah.
yeah, okay. So what we're going to try to do is to stabilize the mind, because that is a prerequisite for deeper insights in this tradition and in any other tradition. So as Donald said, shamatha means to gather, to put together, to unify the mind in a steady and undistracted awareness. And we benefit from these practices. Not only we benefit from for this practice to further practice more, but also for our everyday lives. Everything that we practice here we will see an impact in our lives, because shamatha enhances our ability to remain calm and centered, but attentive in everyday situations, not only throughout the practice of meditation. Who doesn't want to have a clear view of the reality, to understand what's going on without being confused, to be having a state of clarity and stability, right? So we are training our minds to do that. So as I think Donald already mentioned, samadhi, the translation, maybe Pali and Sanskrit, is more concentration, right? But I'm repeating everything Donald said, but sometimes how the Buddha repeated 3, 5, 80 times the same, because maybe in my voice it lands you better than how in the voice of Donald or whatever. But concentration is a main aspect of that will help the mind and the body to be quiet and calm. If we are not quiet or calm, there's no ability, the mind is not clear, and we wouldn't be able to achieve that perception or insight of the reality clearly as we are trying to perceive. So practicing shamatha, or calm abiding or tranquility, is going to help us achieve that clear view of samadhi. And so neither are goals on itself. They are only means, right? They are only kind of techniques or instruments. And in the process of practicing shamatha and achieving samadhi, you might find that maybe there's a little bit of bliss, which, everybody's happy with feeling good. Why not, right? Although that's not the purpose, right? And if you feel bliss, perfectly okay, but do not follow that. It's just a secondary effect of what we're trying to achieve, which is welcome. What we really want by stabilizing the body, the mind, by being concentrated, is to understand and see more clearly the 3 characteristics of the existence. As again, Donald just said, I'm repeating, everything changes, nothing is permanent. Everything, or our experience of reality, is one of unsatisfactoriness. And excuse my English pronunciation, I hope you understand. And the other aspect, which is we are not where we think we are, right? The non-self aspect of being. So I'm going to guide you in the next maybe 30 minutes on a practice that hopefully lead us into practicing shamatha, achieving samadhi, and getting a little bit of a taste or a glimpse or the first steps towards what we're looking for. So for that practice, as usual, as with any other practice, I will invite you first, if you feel like, to set up an intention, not only for this next 30 minutes, maybe for the rest of the 2.5 hours that are left for this half day. Set an intention. Maybe you had already one, maybe it was implicit, maybe you want to make it explicit. And I always like to start with my gorgeous, beautiful bell. So for me, it's the sign of the starting of this silent sitting meditation, and will also mark the end of the meditation. So hopefully, while you are listening to the sound of the bell, allow all the muscles of your body to melt down, to relax, soften, ease. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of your posture that can be one of dignity, of vividness, of alertness, but at the same time of completely relaxation. Which is the way in which we want to live our lives, right? Totally alert, vivid, present, alive, but relaxed, at ease. And that posture will help and support the mental clarity and the physical ease as well. So inviting you into bringing your attention to where those parts of your body that are in touch with the ground, could be through a chair, a cushion, or the floor. What, the feet, the thighs. Just be aware of your placement on earth. And let all the weight of your body rest and land on those few parts of your body. And as Donald mentioned, each one of you might have already a specific object of concentration, or what we sometimes call the anchor, that object that brings us back over and over to the present moment. So I'm going to suggest maybe you want to choose your feet, the sensations of the feet on the floor or the cushion. For some of you, might be sounds outside your room, inside your room, even inside your body. You know, my voice coming through the speaker. And for some of you, it might be the breath. And whatever you have chosen as your anchor or main object of concentration, can you make it as a sweet spot? No, it's not a job, it's not a tough work. Be friendly to your object, because we're practicing calm abiding. So there is nothing we need or want to achieve. By just relaxing the body and being aware that we're still awake and alert and alive, that will unfold naturally. We had already settled our body in its natural state. And we're settling maybe the breath in its natural rhythm. Now trust that the mind will follow the body. We all have that capacity inside. Trust and be confident that it is already there. With kind and gentle attention. And remembering, this is the practice of remembering. Continuously bringing the mind back to your object of meditation with utter gentleness. So now I will invite you to experiment impermanence through in your body right now, right here. So you can use your object of concentration or your anchor also as an instrument to learn about impermanence. And pay attention. How is it right now? Is it unmovable? The sensation? Is it exactly the same all the time? If it's the sound, like this, it arises, it grows, it fades, and it passes away. It's a very clear example of impermanence. Can you equate those three aspects to any sensation in your body. Pay attention when it suddenly appears, arises, maybe an itch. Does it stay there forever? Was it there always? It never goes away, even if you don't scratch it. Just be curious. You can try it with the breath. If that's not your main anchor, just try the breath to analyze and see how it arises and passes away and gives birth to the next. And each one breath is different to the previous one. Like a pendulum, up and down, in and out. Changing forever. And we get distracted. That's the natural of our minds. Do not get disappointed. That happens always, all the time. And our job is to note that, to notice it, and with utter gentleness, bringing the mind back to the object of meditation. So I'm going to leave you in silence so you can practice this with a balanced amount of effort and easiness at your own pace. Going back to your main anchor and noticing the arising and passing away. Thank you. I invite you to, bring the attention back to the screen. And if you need to do a little stretch, we'll, in a few minutes, in 10, 15 minutes, we will have a break. But if you need to stretch or change postures or drink something, you're welcome. We will be heading into a little bit of discussion or questions, mainly if you are feeling confused, because we don't want to confuse you, or if you have any question about the practice or what Donald offered us this morning.
Could also be something about how we do this further in a 7-day retreat, if you're interested in exploring that. So anything about the talk, the meditation, the teachings, possibly the retreat. And you can just, I think, raise your hand if you want to be recognized. Most people are on screen. If you're not on screen, you can do the raised hand function. And half-baked questions are fine. Looks like Lashonda, please.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Tariq, for guiding us through that. I'm wondering, is there any expectation that one sets for themselves, like after they come out? And I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. Like, is there an expectation? Like, should I feel when I think about, like you said, the unifying the mind, heart, and body? Like, is there an expectation of like, now I have a clear insight on X, or is it more of a state of being after like that bell sounds? we come back to this place.
Let's see, should I take that, Terry?
Yeah, I'll get it, and please, you feel it.
Yeah, so it's really Lashonda, really asking, where is this leading, and what might we expect to experience after doing this for a while, something like that.
Yeah, and maybe that definitely is a half-baked question. So Donald, thank you for welcoming it. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, all of these practices are ones that we do for the long term. And for example, in developing stability of mind or more samadhi, where it goes, it's helpful to have a sense of where it's going is the potential that's sometimes there, sometimes not there, to be totally focused on an object, applications in daily life where we can be fully focused on what's ahead of us, what we're doing, and so forth. And so we really stabilize the mind some. One of my teachers in developing samadhi actually taught 2-day trainings for federal judges to develop more samadhi, more stability of mind. And so it really helps the mind not to be so distracted. It's not a linear process to get there. There are all sorts of ups and downs, and, in a retreat, all we do is we do our best to keep coming back and being with the anchor as best we can. And sometimes we're fully with it. Sometimes we're with it for 5 seconds. The mind wanders, and that's normal, and that's okay, right? And so it's normal to, when we're training or when there's a lot on our minds, for the mind to have some challenge in being stable for very long, right? And yet, if we stay with it, it develops. And it's pretty interesting. I can watch my own experience over 45 plus years. And when I first was practicing, my mind was all over the place. I was a student and I thought I was supposed to be thinking all the time. And then, as we do it more, it stabilizes more. But all we do is we do our best every given moment and try to not be hard on ourselves, not expect too much. And it's pretty much the same thing with the other practices. We more or less just follow the instructions. In the retreat, we have an opportunity to share in small groups and to have one-on-ones with the teachers, so we can be very personal and just bring up things. And so basically keep on practicing, check in with teachers to make sure we're practicing, as it were, in the right way. And if we do that, it'll develop. Thank you.
May I add something, Donald?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love your question, Shonda. I love it, because we always want, like, what am I supposed to feel or get or sense, right? So nothing, absolutely nothing. And if we're chasing something, then that's not the right way to go. Do not chase anything. And you might not feel the bliss that I mentioned. You might not feel that I'm there all the time. You might feel, I'm terrible at doing this, but then later on your life, as Donald said, maybe if your life is being impacted, who cares if you got the right thing or not the right thing? Your life is gonna be impacted because even if you did not notice, you were learning already about impermanence just by observing the breath. You are already learning the impermanence, even if you cannot describe it with words, right? And you are already noticing how we are always chasing something or fighting against some other thing. So don't have expectations. Just see how life unfolds, and it will help also. Thank you.
Yeah, it's sort of a paradox. We want not to get too caught in expectations, and yet we know this does go in a certain direction. So hold both at the same time. Other thoughts, questions can be about the talk, about anything you've experienced. Generally at the retreat, what we'll be doing is we'll be focusing on samadhi and just being with the anchor almost exclusively for the first 2 days. Then we'll bring in attention to impermanence and so forth, but the way the structure will be, it'll be something like, first we'll stabilize. We have a 45-minute sitting or 30-minute sitting. We'll do maybe the first third or half will be just staying with developing samadhi. And then we'll move to the new practice. So we're going to keep the development of samadhi going actually for parts of virtually every session for all the 7 days. Other sharing, insights, questions? Here's what I noticed. Yeah. Colleen, please.
Is there a good book to read about samadhi?
Is there a good book to read about samadhi? I'll say very briefly, maybe you want to add, Tere. Actually, at the retreat, we will have a resource packet with a substantial reading list. And I think a good starting point is the book called Samadhi by Richard Shankman, Shankman. And that is simply called Samadhi. And that's a very nice overview. It gives both a sense of the practice, gives a grounding in the teachings of the Buddha, and then very interesting, has interviews in the last part of the book with 7 contemporary teachers of samadhi who teach sometimes in rather different ways. Yeah, so that's a good starting point. Terry, do you have ones that have been helpful for you?
Yes, but not right out of my mind. I immediately wanted to go grab my books, and I have a couple, but maybe we can send that on the link. Hopefully, Che will confirm after the retreat. This half day, we will send you some notes, and we can include those there. Yeah, and I get that, Colleen, that we want to understand rationally what we're doing, but it's mostly something that magically happens when we do it. You know, there's not a clear explanation of how does it happen, but it happens. As we were practicing in the past few minutes, just observing the breath or changing, you are already achieving clarity. You're already opening your heart. There's many things that are happening without being very specific and clear. But I get that we once we get the clear understanding, it's better to practice.
And there's a very nice book. I think that's also on the list we'll give at the retreat, which is called, it's by Rob Burbea, B-U-R-B-E-A, a British teacher who unfortunately died young, but he still has, you know, he wrote a very wonderful book called Seeing That Freeze. Seeing That Freeze. And that has very good chapters on samadhi, and also very good material on impermanence and dukkha and not self. So really covering a lot of what we'll do in the retreats. And I should mention also that I have talks which are on the website Dharma Seed, quite a few talks on cultivating samadhi. So if you look under my name on the website Dharma Seed and put in either concentration or samadhi, you'll find some longer talks. Yeah, thank you, Colleen. Maybe time for one more. LaShonda, did you have something further? Okay. Could be a sharing, can be half-baked or quarter-baked or fully baked. Okay, maybe Terry, we should go. We were going to say a few words about dana, right? Why don't we do that right now? How many people are pretty familiar with dana as a practice? Okay, and not everyone. And so we thought that, you know, the way this was set up, there was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Che, I think there's no fee for the event. It's totally what we call a dana event. And there was an invitation to offer dana with registration, right? And so some of you probably did that. Usually when we teach, we do what we call a dana talk, and we have the potential to offer dana. Dana is a word that in the original language would usually translate as generosity. And it basically is a core teaching about having generosity be at the, you know, part of the core of one's life, generosity of one's spirit, energies, all sorts of things. And it's also been the way that for several thousand years, teachings and practices have been organized in terms of the economics, so that there was never been any charge for teachings and practices, you know, when the Buddha was teaching. And many of us have tried to have that be the model for Western retreats. Often there's a cost, like there is for the May retreat, which is a cost for just keeping a center going, sort of a break-even nonprofit cost. And then there's an opportunity to offer support for teachers in some places also for the center or the staff. And so that's how this is organized, just as, we, Terry and I, are not paid anything by, before coming on. And so everything that will be offered at the retreat and then also for today comes through your free offering. And it's totally up to you. If you're new to it, it can be a little bit confusing, what's appropriate, etc. But we sort of really want to leave that to you. And if many of us may have been, known what dana is and offered something that we felt was appropriate, before we registered. If there's any reason you want to, if you weren't clear about that and you want to offer something, I think Shay put a dana link on the in the chat. So Terry, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. You were very clear, Donna. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And so I think, I don't know for Terry, for me, almost all of my income is from people offering at retreats and teachings, and also when I do one-on-one work. So I think that's probably enough said. And, for many of us, what we offered earlier was totally adequate. But if you didn't feel that was the case or were confused, you can use the link. And I think it's shared 50-50 between the teachers and the retreat center, just so you know. Okay, maybe with that being said, we have about 20 minutes now, and it can be used for walking meditation if you want to stay in the spirit of silence. You can, of course, use the bathroom, do what you need to do, have a little snack, and we'll come back with the second session at 11:45 Pacific, so a little less than 20 minutes, okay? So thanks, everyone. We'll come back for the second session, going further with seeing ways of seeing that liberate and awakened awareness. Thank you. Welcome back. I hope that was a helpful break, and we'll continue in this second session following a similar structure as what we previously did, which is to say a talk giving an outline of the practices that we'll explore briefly in this session and in way more depth at the May retreat. I'll give an overview, talk about 25 minutes or so. Terry will add some further comments, and then we'll again do a guided meditation working with the core practices that we're exploring in this session, and follow that by having a period of discussion, and that will lead to our closing. The time for me is going very quickly, which I think is a good sign. Yeah. So the second broad area of this retreat here, as well as the May retreat, is what in the retreat title is called seeing. And this is, I like the phrase, seeing that frees, or the insight that liberates. And again, this is getting at what the Buddha said are the core insights that all of this leads to. And I would call them liberating insights. This is what leads to freedom and cuts through the core problems of human life, which the Buddha summarized as greed, hatred, and delusion, right? And we'll, in a few moments, we'll see some of the ways that the second form of seeing, which is seeing into dukkha, or reactivity, is really, really key and helps make sense of the fundamental teachings. So I want to talk first about seeing into dukkha. I'll translate the primary meaning as reactivity. And I'll explain why it's actually a confusing term, because there are multiple meanings that the Buddha gave for dukkha. Then I'll talk some about not self, which can also be quite confusing. I'll try to leave us with perfect clarity about everything. If not, you're Donna back. No, just joking. And then I'll bring up exploring awakened awareness, which is very, very rarely taught in Buddhist settings, particularly in insight meditation settings, and is really, for many of us, it's a more advanced state of awareness and practice, actually not very hard to experience for a moment, but rather difficult to stabilize and have that be there continually, first in our meditation and then in our daily lives. And in all of this, I'm going to be talking and guiding us in this session a little bit more than Terry, partly because the retreat we're doing, which Terry is joining me for, is a retreat which I developed about 8 years ago, following about 5 years of my own practice, where for the, generally, especially in a month or two retreat that I would do every year, I practiced these 3 forms over a 5-year period, and then started offering retreats on this topic, on these themes in 2015, and have developed this retreat, which we'll be offering in May, and taught it, I think, about at least 10 or 12 times. And so I'll be doing a little bit more of this session than Tere, but she'll be joining in. So what does insight into dukkha mean? This is confusing for several reasons. The first reason is that in the teachings of the Buddha, he gave different meanings to the word dukkha. Dukkha is usually translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness, which is the term that Tere gave us. But I want to try to make sense of the deep meaning of dukkha, the most important meaning of dukkha, which is where the Buddha talked about the aim of the practice is understanding dukkha and the end of dukkha. That's something that appears really in the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, where the first 2 truths are understanding the nature of dukkha, and then the third noble truth is saying that dukkha can end. But what does it mean for the dukkha to end? I think it's quite confusing. And I want to try to clarify why it's confusing. So let's use the first slide now, Che. We'll put the first slide on. This, I think, can help us understand why this is confusing. I think in the actual text, there are at least 4 meanings of dukkha that we find. The first meaning, that is probably the most common, is that the dukkha is what is unpleasant or painful. And this is very common. The Buddha did not have an editor who said, "Hey, Buddha, there are all these different meanings." So the primary meaning he gave to dukkha, sometimes called dukkha dukkha, is that dukkha is what is unpleasant. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to think, for these first 3 meanings of dukkha, what does the end of dukkha mean? Do these forms of dukkha ever end? I'm going to say that they don't. Do unpleasant experiences. The Buddha talks about birth, sickness, old age, and death. Really important to look at these experiences. But does dukkha of this kind ever end? And I have to say the answer is no. The Buddha, when he was older, for example, had headaches and a bad back. That is dukkha dukkha. That's the unpleasant. Does that ever end when we're alive? No. It at times keeps happening. A second meaning of dukkha in the text is called viparinama dukkha. This is the discomfort of change, the fact that what is pleasant now will later become unpleasant. And the Buddha talked about that as a form of dukkha, that the pleasant isn't lasting. But we can say, does this ever change? No, this is just the way things are. And so that doesn't help us understand what the end of dukkha means. Similarly, the third meaning of dukkha is that nothing is ultimately satisfying. No conditioned experience can give lasting satisfaction. I can have a wonderful meal. Is there lasting satisfaction? No. I can have a wonderful relationship. Is there lasting satisfaction? No, it can give a lot of satisfaction, but it's not forever. And in that way, nothing really can give lasting satisfaction. That's a form of dukkha. But then we can ask, does this end? Does this form of dukkha end? And I think we can have the answer, no, this is just the way things are. And so none of these first three meanings of dukkha give us a clear sense of what the end of dukkha means. Although we could probably take the third one and say that if we no longer think about conditioned experience giving lasting satisfaction, well, we could say that we're happier. But strictly speaking, the third form of dukkha never ends itself. So then the question is, is there a form of dukkha that ends? And I'm going to say that the answer to that is reactivity as dukkha. And we can see this I'll give two teachings that bring this out. One of them is called the teaching of the two arrows. And this is the teaching that the Buddha gives. He's with practitioners and he says, everyone at times experiences the unpleasant or the painful. Is there a difference between a skilled practitioner and a non-practitioner or an unskilled practitioner? Everyone at times experiences what's unpleasant. And the Buddha said, no, there's no difference. A skilled practitioner sometimes has unpleasant experiences, as I mentioned. But then the Buddha says, there's a difference in what happens when the unpleasant experience is there. The Buddha called the experience of the painful or the unpleasant an experience of being shot by the first arrow. He said, when we have unpleasant experiences, it's like being shot by an arrow. He called this the first arrow. So we may have unpleasant body sensations, unpleasant emotions, unpleasant interactions with people, and so forth. He said, everyone has these experiences, no difference at all between a very skilled practitioner and someone who is not skilled at all. He said the difference is what happens once one is shot by the first arrow. He said an unskilled practitioner will tend to shoot a second arrow as if this would help, whereas a skilled practitioner learns not to shoot a second arrow. What does that look like? I have unpleasant body sensations. What does it look like to shoot the second arrow? I tense around the unpleasant body sensations, or I blame myself for them. Where I stub my toe walking across my room and I blame my son for leaving something that was there. Those are all forms of the second arrow. At the physical level, I shoot a second arrow as if that would help. A skilled practitioner learns not to do that. That's no longer being caught in reactivity. Emotionally, I have anger and I criticize myself or blame myself for being angry. That's shooting the second arrow. Similarly, I have a difficult interaction with someone. Someone says something unpleasant to me. and I say something right back unpleasant to that person. That's another example of shooting the second arrow. I'm going to call shooting the second arrow reactivity. And I'll give one more teaching. Let's go to the second slide now, Che. The second slide is a teaching of dependent origination. And this brings out very clearly what it means to shoot the second arrow or be engaged in reactivity with. And this can really point to how our practice, as we develop, we learn to be with the unpleasant or the pleasant without grasping or pushing away. So here's the teaching briefly. Every moment we have contact with a sense. For the Buddha, this also includes thinking. We smell something, we feel something, we think something, and so forth. With every moment of contact, there's a feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. You know, I look over right now, I look over to a plant, it's pleasant. You know, I feel some sensation sitting on my chair, a little bit unpleasant from not having moved for the last 15 minutes. And then I notice that it's unpleasant. So we can have pleasant or unpleasant. So far, so good. But then when we're not mindful, and when we have underlying delusion or ignorance, what I'll tend to do with everything pleasant, I will tend to want it, and I will tend to grasp after it. With every moment that's unpleasant, I will tend to not want it and tend to push it away. We do this in 100 different ways. We can do it at the level of the body. I can do it mentally in so many ways. I can be blaming, judgmental. I can say something nasty about someone. Those are all forms of pushing away. I'm going to say that number 4, grasping or pushing away, are the 2 forms of reactivity. That is the deep meaning of dukkha. It comes through in that other teaching of the 2 arrows. What the whole center of the practice is about is not going as much as we can to number 4, to the compulsive habitual grasping or pushing away of the unpleasant, the grasping after the pleasant. One very important qualification is this doesn't, the key is the unconscious, habitual, automatic tendency of the grasping or pushing away. It's possible when we are conscious to go for the pleasant and to, in some ways, act to avoid the unpleasant. And so that's a nuance of this teaching. And that the key for understanding reactivity is that it's unconscious, habitual, but we can choose, if I'm aware, I can choose to have a second piece of cake. I can go for more pleasant. If I'm an activist, I can act against what's unpleasant to me, which is injustice. What's key is that I do so without reactivity. Okay, so there are a lot of nuances there. We can come back to that. But the key for this teaching is that the deep meaning of dukkha is the reactivity, shooting the second arrow, pushing away what's unpleasant in many, many possible ways, and then grasping after the pleasant. Okay, let's let go of the slide. So we could take a lot more time with this. It's really, for me, this is actually at the center of the entire 2,600 years of tradition. I just explained it to you in about 15 minutes. That's it. Bye. Go home and practice. That's the core of all the teachings, what I just gave you. Easier said than done, right? But I wanted to say a little bit more. We can come back to this, and in a moment, we'll work with the guided practice. The third of the ways of seeing that free is seeing into what's called not self. And I think I want to be very brief here because it's a complicated teaching. At the retreat, we'll go into much more depth on this. But it's can be quite a confusing teaching. You know, one of the One of the ways it's expressed as confusing comes in what's sometimes called Jewish Buddhist humor. Anyone come across Jewish Buddhist humor at times? And there's a phrase that says, the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. The Buddha says there's no self. I guess we're off the hook. So that's Jewish Buddhist humor. It just really shows that it can be a very confusing teaching. In the retreat, what I like to do is focus very practically, and this is what I found in my teaching to be most skillful. I don't give too much of a conceptual understanding of not self, but I say we practice in two main ways. One of them is we see where we have a very strong sense of self, what I call a thick sense of self. You know, where I'm blaming, judging, I'm preoccupied with self-image, all these different ways where I have a thick sense of self, which, you know, can occur, you know, every day to some extent. We study those in our meditation. That's one way of practicing, and I'll explore that in the guided meditation in a moment. The second way is that gradually we learn how to practice with what I call a more thin sense of self. You know, and this is our ordinary mindfulness practice does this. We look at everything that's occurring in our experience, but I try not to take it personally. You know, I sit, I watch the breath, I let the breath happen, and I just try to be with the sensations. I notice a thought, I just say thought, without making a big thing about it being my thought. So I just sit there almost and let whatever happens in my experience just occur. That's our ordinary mindfulness practice. And so I call that a way of almost having a thinned out sense of self, because I just look at my experience almost as if I was a scientist. Okay, just a thought, okay, thought, breath, okay, there's just the breath happening. Oh, I have body sensations now. And I'm doing so, all of that, without much sense of self. That's one way that we have a kind of thinning of the self. And that, for me, that's a core way of experiencing not self. Can I experience life? Can I experience the tree, a sunset, without making it all about me, right? And I think we all do that often, more often than we think, okay? So I'm going to stop with that explanation and then say a little bit more about awakened awareness, okay? And this is a more advanced state that I think we probably have experienced, but it's something we may not have recognized. And I'm going to, in the retreat and now, I refer to it with three main reference points. One is, I mentioned that for the Buddha, he says that there's a deeper state, and these are just in a few passages. He says that there's a kind of consciousness which the Buddha calls signless, without any concepts. He calls it signless, boundless, and all luminous. Signless means my conceptualizing is gone. Boundless means that there's a sense of vast space. And all luminous means, well, there's a lot of light. And so the Buddha talks about this as something that we can experience, which is, and some people take this to be similar to nirvana. Here's a passage from the Buddha. Where consciousness is signless, boundless, all luminous, that's where earth, water, fire, and air find no footing, meaning one's beyond the usual concepts. Both long and short, small and great, fair and foul, are wholly destroyed. There's no conceptualizing going on anymore. Where a sage has come to know this for oneself, through one's wisdom, one is freed from form and formless, freed from attachment to pleasure and pain. So this is a deep state that the Buddha talked about. He also said it's similar to what he called the deathless. We find this also in other traditions. We find it, for example, in the Thai forest tradition, coming from Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Mun, and others. And here it's talked about as, sometimes talked about as the radiant mind. Also something the Buddha talked about. This is from one of the great teachers in the Thai forest tradition, Ajahn Mun. And we'll look into this a lot more in depth at the 1 week retreat. He says, the mind and heart are something more radiant than anything else can be. But because passing defilements come and obscure it, it loses its radiance like the sun when obscured by clouds. So he says that our basic nature, and the Buddha talked about this as well, is radiant. Another way to say it is that we are filled, our deep nature is clarity and love. Because the Buddha also said this radiance is linked with metta, or loving kindness. Our deep nature is clarity, wisdom, and love, but it gets covered over. We can experience it at moments, but it gets covered over by all our conditioning, all the stuff of our lives. The aim of practice, and this is what, again, is not taught very much in the teaching of insight meditation. We'll be giving a whole section of the retreat to this. And it's really taught as a way of experience. It's also brought out in the Tibetan tradition, where it's talked about as, I'll just finish with one passage that I like a lot, which this is from a 16th century Tibetan teacher. He says that this state is open like the sky, pervasive like the earth, unshakable like a mountain, shining like a flame, lucid like a crystal. Again, not so hard to experience, but hard to have stable. We'll be exploring this in a moment in the guided meditation after we've looked at some of the dukkha and not self. And then in the retreat, we'll give a full 2 days to exploring this. So Tere, let me invite you to add anything you'd like to what I said.
Thank you, Donald. I really love all this. I get fascinated. And I want to say that now that you just mentioned the Tibetan tradition, in the classical teachings of dukkha, it means that dukkha, that suffering that mentioned Donald, like the first kind of suffering that is unavoidable. There's no way, no one will escape old age or sickness or death or separation. There's no way you can avoid that. It's more related to perpetuating the cycle of birth, death, and they refer to rebirth, which in our tradition, we don't mention rebirth. So I just want to translate that into the inside perception of the dukkha, right? It's more oriented towards helping us understand our everyday life. How do we relate with our every single day? We don't care about if we're going to be rebirth or not, if this is our first life or our 225,000 lives. What about this moment, right? What about this moment? Because the ultimate goal of Buddhism is to break free from that cycle of wanting, of achieving, of pushing away, of not accepting. I love the explanation that Donald gave. There's dukkhas that, we cannot do anything about things changing. We cannot do anything about, us getting sick, but we can do something about how do we react with things. And well, I'm going to take the last phrase that Donald said, that it is our basic nature. You know, our basic nature is radiant already. We have clarity and there's wisdom and love. So where is it? I don't see it. Like you're saying that word. So that's why we sit in silence. That's why we quiet our bodies. That's why we allow the body to settle. We allow the mind to quiet so we can finally have the ability to get in touch with that innate nature of us that's already there. You don't need to go buy it to get it anywhere to try to achieve nothing. Just let it, you know, all the filters that we have because of, you know, we protect ourselves since we are babies. So this practice is about discovering that what it is already in us. So just finding, discovering. And as he mentioned, you might have had a little glimpse of that. Maybe it lasted a second or 5 seconds or a nanosecond. I don't know. We all have had that. But how can we sustain that? Not through chasing it, right? But just through these practices. You know, these very simple practices that I'm sure that are all fed by your own personal practices, the practices that you do at home as well. The other point I want to emphasize is that I think we all came to understand that suffering mainly is based out of ignorance, right? Because I'm attached, I want something because I think that that something is going to offer me long-lasting, genuine happiness. That is why I'm attaching to things, because I'm confused. I don't see clearly that that thing that I'm chasing is not going to give me long-lasting happiness. And I have aversion towards things because I think those are the culprits of my not being free or happy. So that comes basically to ignorance, right? So how do we get rid of ignorance? As we have been said, allow the mind to quiet, you know, through shamatha practices. When we get into samadhi and really one focus concentration like laser, the mind gets clearer and just our own innate wisdom will come out. We don't need to go read or learn anything. It's already there. We're just we're trying to do less. We're trying to achieve less, trying to get less. So these qualities can show up freely in us and we can have access to them more, you know, for longer periods and not just the tiny little glimpses that we get. But having said that, I commend you to trust that. If you had a glimpse of that trust, it's already there, right? So these practices can help you either get more glimpses until there's one huge one, right, that can stay longer. That's all I want to share, Donald. I'm gonna, you know, bring the space to you so you can lead us into the next meditation.
Yeah, thank you, Tsai. So we'll go into about a half-hour meditation now. If you want to move around a little bit, shift a little bit. If it's helpful to stand up, feel free to do that. Not a break, but we'll start in about 30 seconds. Good, so let's begin. Very much like Terry guided us earlier. We first check the posture. We want to be both alert and relaxed. And of course, if you need to stand up during the sitting, you can feel free to do that. So check your posture, especially the back straight as much as possible, area of the heart open as much as possible. And then also bring to mind, take about 30, 40 seconds with your intention for this session. And so in this session, we'll briefly review what we've already done. We'll really get a taste in this meditation period of all the practices that we'll explore in 7 days at the retreat. But again, many of these will be familiar to a number of us. So let's start with the cultivation of samadhi or concentration. We'll stay with this for about 5 minutes. Just in your own way, choosing your anchor or staying with one that maybe you've had for a long time. Being with the anchor and continually coming back. One thing you can ask yourself is, do I tend to be over-efforting or under-efforting? How can I have a balance of effort that's not overdone, that has a combination of ease and relaxation, along with continually coming back? That's really the aspiration here. So ask yourself how to balance that, and we'll go right into several minutes of just coming back continually, staying with the anchor, coming back if we go off. And when we do samadhi practice, we don't have to label like we do in insight meditation where we've gone. If we find ourselves planning, for example, just come right back. We don't even have to label planning. We just keep coming back over and over. We'll stay with the samadhi cultivation now for about 3 or 4 minutes more. Now we'll move for a brief period of focusing on impermanence and things changing. And in my experience, the two most accessible ways to explore impermanence for most people initially are with either body sensations or sounds. These are the easiest to follow. And the idea is that we just stay noticing something arising, something staying for a while, changing, and then something passing away. We can do that with sounds. In a moment, I'll ring the bell and we can work with sounds. Can also do it with body sensations. You know, as Tere was guiding us, we can do it with the breath, just noticing the arising and passing, the arising, the staying, the changing, the passing away. We could just focus on a particular part of our body and observe that. It's not meant to be dramatic. It's really, the learning comes from just doing it over and over again for a long time and really getting really familiar with it. So it's actually pretty easy, but the learning comes from hanging out with it for a long time. So I'll start with sound. I'll ring the bell. Listen to the arising, just noticing the arising, the staying for a while and changing, and then the passing away. And similarly, we can stay with body sensations. So just choose a part of your body to notice. Could be the breath, could be just the hands touching together. Focus on a particular area, could be the contact with the chair or cushion, could be the belly area. Choose one of those and just notice the continual flow of sensations arising, changing, passing away. And it's okay when you're doing this practice just to name it in your mind, arising, changing, passing away. Very light labels that you can use in your mind. We'll do this now for a few minutes. Now we'll give a little more attention to noticing dukkha, which again, I'll use what I think the main or most important meaning is of reactivity. So as we watch the flow of experience, and we can just stay, if you want to, with what you were just focusing on, what we want to look out for is, are there moments where something is pleasant and I, in a way, grasp after it, either at the body level or the thought level? Is there something unpleasant where I push it away, where there's reactivity in that way? Could be at the level of the body or also through a thought, or it could come up just related to something else. I could have in mind, I could just have something come to mind that happened yesterday, maybe a difficult interaction, and I notice some blaming or judging of myself or someone else. That's also a moment of reactivity. We want to look out for that. So here, the instruction is just let the flow of experience occur and notice if there are any moments of reactivity. And we can particularly look for it when there's a moment that we find somewhat pleasant or a moment that we find somewhat unpleasant. The prediction would be that if those are occurring, unless we're really aware, there's likely to be reactivity. So track for the next few minutes for any moment of reactivity with some special attention to any moments that feel pleasant or unpleasant. Again, at the level of the body or thoughts. Now we'll go to the third way of cultivating liberating insight, attending to what's called not self. Again, at the retreat, we'll have a lot more depth clarifying what that means. But here we'll just interpret our ordinary mindfulness practice as a way of both developing a way of experiencing free of the ordinary sense of self, relatively free, with the possibility then of noticing when what I called a thick sense of self arises. It can be a very simple way of looking. So we just let the flow of experience occur. We can be with our anchor and just notice the breath or some other focus area. We just notice that happening. We notice a thought arises. We notice the flow of experience occurring. And probably for all of us, just to a significant extent, it's just occurring without commentary, without controlling. But then we also want to look for when a strong sense of self comes in, or a moderate or stronger sense of self. So that can be there when we have more sort of self-centered thinking. I can just be with the breath, just letting it happen. And then I think of, again, maybe about something that happened yesterday, and I go into a lot of thinking, which is centered around me. Then we want to bring mindfulness to that. When it's no longer there, we go back to just the flow of experience. So we watch the flow of experience as much as possible, just occurring, but we have our radar out for any moment where there's a strong sense of self. And if that does occur, we bring attention to it. As long as it's predominant, then we go back to the flow when it's no longer predominant. So we'll do this also just for a few minutes. And now for the last part of the guided practice, I'll be offering one of the methods that we'll use at the retreat to access what I'm calling awakened awareness. Again, accessing is not so hard. Stabilizing can be harder. It's not so hard to experience this for a moment, this beautiful quality of the radiant mind. And I'll be using a method that comes from the Thai forest tradition. Very simple method. And at the retreat, we'll use 5 or 6 different methods. And all we need to do is find one that works for ourselves. This is a technique that came from the founder of the Thai forest tradition, really Achan Mun, M-U-N. And he taught it to Achan Cha, who I got to study with, who is the teacher also of Jack Kornfield and other teachers. And it goes like this. Be aware of the flow of experience right now. Be aware of the flow of phenomena. You hear my voice, maybe there feel the breath. Just notice the flow of phenomena for a little while. One thing happening after another. Now notice that there is this flow of different phenomena we're experiencing, but there's also an awareness that is knowing the phenomena, and that awareness is in the background. We're tuned into the phenomena. Get a sense of the awareness that is noticing the phenomena and see if you can shift so that the phenomena, moment-to-moment experience, goes into the background and the awareness is the foreground. Focus on the awareness, knowing the phenomena. See if you can do that. We're becoming aware of awareness. And now let the awareness go back into the background and go back to being with the flow of phenomena, the flow of impermanent phenomena being in the foreground. Stay with that for a little while. And now once again, shift so that you're moving the flow of phenomena to the background and making the awareness go from the background to the foreground. Become aware of awareness. The awareness that is knowing. Be aware of the awareness that is knowing. And now letting go of that awareness of awareness, let the awareness go back to the background and be again with the flow of phenomena. how many people did have in that last part some awareness of awareness? And did it feel like you were opening up to something a little bit different? How many people felt just a little different than ordinary consciousness? Yeah, maybe just a little even, right? And so again, this is what we'll explore. We'll explore different methods for that. And we'll do that over the last 2.5 days of the retreat. So this time today has been a taste. My mind was thinking of one of those, I don't know, food tasting experiences where you get a lot of taste, but you can get a sense of what we're exploring. And you got like I say, these were the jewels of the tradition. Presented, I prefer to present them at length over 7 days, but 3 hours is okay. So we can open things up now to any sharing, questions about what we've done, about any of the teachings, about anything related to the retreat as well. Yeah. Anyone have anything you'd like to share or ask? Could just be, how many people were able to follow like some of the just the simple practices, cultivating awareness of impermanence, right? That was pretty straightforward, right? Again, that's something which the learning comes from doing it over time, right? Like when I've done that and done pretty much what we did for 3 minutes, done it for 1 week, I said, whoa, things are really changing. It's like that, right? And it's not a hard practice, right? But again, I think as Terry was saying, these are not really hard practices, and we just, but what's hard is to keep with them, right? That's why we have a group or a retreat. Any thoughts or questions? Sharing? Please, is it Marie? Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to say I found that last exercise very powerful. I've been meditating for about 12 years, but that was a new dimension to it that I really appreciated.
Yeah, that was the one where we go from background to foreground.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it was really interesting. That was what. How many people have heard of Ajahn Chah, the teacher of Jack Kornfield and others? And again, I got to study with him, a wonderful Thai teacher who died around early 1990s. And he had done some monastic training, but hadn't really found a teacher he liked. And he heard of this wandering teacher named Ajahn Mun, who lived in I think he died in 1949, and this was around 1945. And Ajahn Chah, went walking all over Thailand trying to find him. It took him like 3 or 4 months to find him. And then he found him, and he said, please teach me. And he said, well, you know what? We're in different lineages, and the rules say that you can only stay with me for 3 days. Ajahn Chah was ready to stay for a long time. And so Ajahn Chah said, no problem, I'll change my lineage. And Ajahn Mun said, no, we need some good people in your lineage, just 3 days. And then he said, and here's what I'll teach you, background and foreground, practice it. So Ajahn went home, he practiced it, then went home and practiced it for another 5 years. But that's pretty much straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And it's a very simple, profound practice. And the idea is that we have this radiant awareness, but we don't tune into it. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions about anything from the whole day or anything you just experienced? question about the teachings and so forth. Yeah, Lashonda, please.
I just want to express gratitude. Thank you so much. As I just sat through this meditation, experienced it, just this idea of discovering me. I believe, Terry, you had said like it's already present, like the clarity, the love, the wisdom, and I believe Donald, you shared that. And I think in this life, it's like I have found myself, and others maybe can relate, where it's like, what is that thing? Or, like it's out there, but I love noticing where it already lives in me and us together. So thank you for that. And it's a gift. So thank you for that. And also just looking at like life, relationships, work, school, all of these dimensions of my life showed up in that space. And looking at the benefit and the blessing of not reacting, not in a way where it's like I'm absent from my life and relationships, like I'm an active participant in it. I didn't get that you're just totally like out of it, but the reaction, like not grasping, not pushing away. I want to spend more time there because I just feel like there's a richness that's there that I want to experience more of. So again, just gratitude. Thank you. And thank you for everyone on who's holding the space as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll say one thing and then turn it over to Terry for a bit. But just Lashonda, what you're talking about, like I say, I said at one point that teaching about reactivity could be said to be at the center of all the teachings of the Buddha and 2,600 years of tradition. And it can be expressed in English in a really, really simple way. Develop the ability to be responsive and not be caught in reactivity. And making it, we use the words in different ways, but, to be responsive, but without grasping after the pleasant or pushing away automatically or habitually. Again, could be done in many, many ways when I'm judgmental, blaming, reactive, quickly just, react when someone says something, particularly trying to push away or get rid of something unpleasant. And rather, can I be responsive, which means dealing with things, but not coming out of reactivity. Another way we could say it is, can I act out of wisdom and love? Yeah. Terry, yeah.
No, it just occurred to me, Donald, that we've been talking about, we're mainly in the Vipassana or insight tradition, right? That's where our main teachings come from, Spirit Rock, Inside LA, Big Bear. But we have been introducing an aspect from the Tibetan Buddhism, which is a little bit more, belongs to that kind of area. And I want to just say, because it came to my mind, a poem that a friend just sent to me from the Zen tradition, so which basically lands in the essence of the teachings, no matter where are we looking them from, are all pointing out towards the same, right? It's just different ways or different manners or different techniques that have been adapted through centuries and millennia in the different cultures that people took the original teachings from. So I wanted to read just a little piece because it just pointed out to me how the essence of all the teachings are the same, but how we can see them different. It's called the Third Patriarch of Zen, Xin Xin Ming by Zheng Tsang. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it great. So it says, the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. So that's, more beautifully said, the thing about aversion and attachment, right? If you wish to see the truth, then hold no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. When the deep meaning of things is not understood, the mind's essential peace is disturbed, but no avail. That's why we apply so much importance to settling, stabilizing, concentration, about calming, so we can see clearly. So when we see clearly, then we're not confused and we're not disturbed. So I just wanted to to share that I just was reading this morning.
Yeah.
How all is interconnected.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry. Yeah, it's really.
Yeah, it's longer. It's way longer.
Yeah,
But
we could probably even bring in, I've given a lot of attention to how some of these teachings even, they're there across different Buddhist traditions, but also we can find them in Christian or Muslim or Jewish traditions. You go to Rumi or something, it's very similar. And just maybe one thing, maybe this is a longer discussion, and I don't know the exact words in the original with what you're saying, but I think the key isn't so much, we all have opinions and preferences, but the key is not being attached to them, right? That's maybe that's another way of saying it. And probably I'd want to even look closely at the original language, because I'm sure, my guess is that was really what was being said, because we don't really, at certain moments, we don't have preferences or opinions, like when we have this awakened awareness, but the key is really not being caught in attachment to them, meaning there's not reactivity in relation to opinions or preferences. I'm going to have lunch in a little while, and I'm going to have lunch that I prefer to eat. Right. So, but am I attached to that? Well, that's the inquiry, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Does that make sense, Terry, for you?
oh, totally. I remember when I started my teachings, that was my huge question to my teachers. How can I be not attached to my children?
Yeah.
Please explain me that. And they say, oh, there's a difference, love to care for themselves, or love because you will not be satisfied if something happened to them. So, there's also a distinction between, like genuine love and egotism, whatever. And I came to understand that the not getting that right view and clear seeing allows you to understand that things might not happen the way you prefer them. So it's good to have a preference, but if they don't happen the way you prefer them, you don't get disappointed.
Yeah, we have preferences maybe, but then we look for where there's reactivity.
And then it's just the reaction, as you said.
And we try not to have too much grasping onto the opinions or preferences, or try to minimize that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe we should go to the U.S. Congress, Terry, and do some teaching.
Hopefully they are open to listen.
Yeah, there's some meditators in the Congress, I remember.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Not too many.
Raskin, Jamie Raskin is one. Yeah, the thing is, ignorance is so pervasive. That's the main poison of our time. So,
any last comment or question from everyone? We're at our closing time, pretty close to it. Yeah, please. Last one, Kyle.
I'll just say thank you both so much, and everyone, for taking this time. And I look forward to being on retreat in May. So.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Kyle. And yeah, if people need more information about the retreat, feel free to reach out to us. If you're thinking about it, this was partly offering this just in itself, or what could be helpful for people, but partly also giving a taste of the retreat for people interested. Yeah.
May I say something just quickly? So I'm one of the founders of Big Bear Retreat Center, and we're still a relatively new place, and we find that the best kind of marketing is just word of mouth. And even if you haven't been there, you at least know kind of what to expect from this retreat. So if there's anyone in addition to yourselves that you think might benefit from the great teachings of Tere and Donald, please, share the information with them as well. Thank you.
Well, and we were missing a huge thank you, Bill, for all the dedication and love and effort that you have put onto that retreat center that allows these things to happen here, and all the people who can benefit from a little bit of quietude and peace and well-fed and gorgeous nature to go inside and discover what is already there.
Yeah. And Bill, I hope to meet you. Will you be there possibly in May?
I was just looking at my calendar. I won't be able to be there for the whole thing, but I hope to come up at least for the first 2 or 3 days of the retreat.
Oh, it's wonderful. Look forward to meeting you. And also, we want to thank so much Che.
Okay.
And yay, Che.
Thank you, thank you. If I was just gonna say a couple of things just to wrap, but Donald and Teddy, are you still wrapping with things?
Yeah, go ahead, Che. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you everyone for taking the time to join on your Saturday and come and find some additional practices in the meditation practices you already have, your connection to stillness that you already have. We would love to have you up on the grounds from May 1st to May 8th to sit with Donald and Teddy in real time in person and continue to grow into and stretch into the practices that they've introduced to you today. Again, I have posted the retreat registration page in the chat. The email that will go out to you as a follow-up in the next 24 to 48 hours from us here at the center will also include this link. It will also have the readings that Donald and Teddy mentioned that can be support and opening for you in this practice. So yeah, thank you so much. If you are not available to sit at that time, as Bill said, feel free to forward the registration link to anyone you know who may be interested in the practice and would love to find some time to be in silence in Big Bear. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, maybe I'll finish with a traditional dedication of merit, which probably many of you familiar with, but it's really remembering our intentions. May our time together be of benefit to us. May it be of benefit to others in our lives. And then beyond our own circles, may our time together be of benefit ultimately to all beings, knowing that we are part of all beings. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your deep commitment to liberation.
Thank you.
Hey, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you next time.